Not too long ago, or maybe a very long time ago, depending on how far in the future you're watching this video, Warner Brothers made the unprecedented choice to completely cancel the Batgirl movie, which they already spent $90 million on, already finished filming as far as I can tell, and were basically like 90% done with the movie. The new leadership had such a small amount of faith in the project and how much money it could make that they opted to cancel it and take a $15 million tax break. While this is the first time they canceled the movie at the level of Batgirl in terms of how complete it was and how much money they spent on it, this isn't anywhere near the first time that Warner Brothers canceled a movie that was in development. Warner Brothers loves announcing every single movie that they put into development without knowing for a fact that that movie will get made, and looking at the list of movies, I realized that there are so many movies that Warner Brothers promised us specifically just for the DCEU that we can build an entire cinematic universe out of those movies, and it may just be a better, more coherent universe than the DCEU. There are many more canceled DC movies, but I limited myself to just the movies that were supposed to be in the DCEU, so very famous canceled DC movies like Superman Lives or Justice League Immortal, or any other canceled movies from before the DCEU, or movies that weren't ever supposed to be in the DCEU, they aren't going to be considered, but still, with all those restrictions, we have enough for an entire cinematic universe. I will be using a similar structure to the MCU, but I'm not beholden to putting an exact counterpart to each movie, but there will be 3 phases. The first 2 phases will consist of 6 movies, and the third will have 11. But outside of that, it is a little bit more free than I did in the past. With that in mind, let's start with the first phase. Phase 1 will be structured very similarly to the MCU's Phase 1, with individual hero films setting up the team up, which is, in this case, the Justice League. The Justice League itself will be slightly different since not every member had a potential canceled movie to use. For instance, Wonder Woman's movies all got made, so there aren't any canceled Wonder Woman movies to include here. But I basically took all of the possible solo films of the members of the Justice League that never came out, and did build an MCU-style Phase 1 out of it, which is going to be slightly different. But the universe actually starts in the exact same way that the real-life DCEU did, and that's Man of Steel. Now obviously Man of Steel wasn't cancelled, but its sequel was, and that's what this movie is based off of. Man of Steel 2 was put into active development in 2016 as a top priority, and for years directors were considered or were considering helming the movie, but nothing ever came of it. And I know with the release of Black Adam, Superman is back, and Man of Steel is back in development, or Man of Steel 2 that is. But when it eventually comes out, it'll be so different from what Man of Steel 2 would have been, and it's so long afterwards that it can't really be considered the same project. So taking Man of Steel 2 will start this universe practically the same way the DCU started, with a Henry Cavill-led Superman movie called Man of Steel. The only difference, or the biggest difference, being the villain, since Man of Steel 2 obviously wouldn't have used Zod, it also wouldn't have used a Luthor or Doomsday, so I think that the villain probably would have been Brainiac, so that's who's going to be the villain of this movie. The second movie in this universe is going to be The Batman, a movie that Ben Affleck would have written, directed, and starred in as the titular Batman, a movie that would have taken place in Arkham Asylum, and Deathstroke, played by Joe Manganiello, would have been the main villain. Eventually, Ben Affleck did step down as director, and Matt Reeves took over, and from there, the movie did eventually come out, but as you probably already know, The Batman doesn't star Ben Affleck, it doesn't take place in Arkham Asylum, or hell, even the DCEU, and doesn't have Deathstroke, so Ben Affleck's The Batman would have been the second movie in this universe with all the same key elements that they planned for the DCEU movie, because while it did technically come out, it was a completely different movie. The next 2 movies in this universe are going to be Cyborg and Green Lantern Corps. I'm putting them together because they were both a part of the initial DCEU lineup, and the only non-Justice League movies from that lineup that never came out. There's also The Flash, but that did eventually come out, or will, in 2023. Green Lantern Corps would have featured Hal Jordan and Jon Stewart as the human Green Lanterns and main characters, and was supposed to come out in 2020 alongside Cyborg, and while a Green Lantern Corps movie is technically still in development, it'll most likely be completely different, since it's recently been confirmed that Jon Stewart will be the main character of the redeveloped Green Lantern TV show on HBO Max, and either that show will have a connection to the DCU, so a Green Lantern Corps movie won't have Jon Stewart, or it won't be in the DCEU, but regardless, Warner Brothers hates the idea of having two characters on screen at the same time in TV and movies, so Jon Stewart probably won't be in the Green Lantern Corps movie, or at least not the same way he would have been. As for Cyborg, that movie was supposed to come out in 2020, and now doesn't seem to even still be in development at all, especially since Ray Fisher will probably never return to Warner Brothers, so if a Cyborg movie does ever get made, it will have a different actor and be completely different. For the sake of this cinematic universe, the Cyborg movie would have to be different, since it's his introduction into this universe, so it would have to have a lot more origin story elements in the movie. A Plastic Man DCEU movie was confirmed to be in development 4 years ago, but we haven't heard any news about it whatsoever, and looking at Warner Brothers' reputation, especially with the new leadership, I think we can assume that the movie was cancelled and will probably never come out. Plastic Man being a founding member of the Justice League is, I'd admit, rather unorthodox, but out of all of the usual founding members, and even prominent members, only Superman, Batman, Green Lantern, and Cyborg had any cancelled movies to use, and while he's not usually a founding member, Plastic Man has been a prominent member of the League, especially in the late 90s and early 2000s in the comics. In the Justice League lineup and in the movie, he's going to be replacing the Flash as the main comic relief and most comedic character in the movie. The final movie of Phase 1 is going to be Justice League. We obviously have Justice League's Part 2 and 3 as potential canceled Justice League movies to use, and I will, but I wanted to have a trilogy here, and I did find some sort of way to include a third Justice League movie as the first one, but I will admit this is the least cancelled movie in this video. The whole Snyder/Whedon fiasco did lead to two different films, the 2017 theatrical Whedon-afflicted movie and the 4-hour HBO Max Snyder Cut. However, there is a universe out there where Snyder never left the director chair, and a theater-friendly runtime, probably 3 hours, and hindsight-free version of the Snyder Cut would have come out, and it never did, so it was technically cancelled even though it got made into two different movies. So this movie uses that as a base, with Aquaman being replaced by one of the human Green Lanterns, probably Jon Stewart, who Snyder did want to use, and the Flash being replaced by Plastic Man. And that brings us to Phase 2. From here on out, I'll be using certain cancelled movies as pseudo-sequels to the Phase 1 movies, not actual sequels since these movies never had any sequels in development, and so the structure is going to be a little different from the MCU, but pseudo-sequels where the main characters of Phase 1 movies appear as side characters in movies about characters associated with them, so that they appear outside of just the Justice League movies in some way. That starts with the pseudo-sequel to The Batman, which is the Jared Leto-led Joker movie. A lot of Joker/Harley Quinn movies were in development at some point that never came out. Enough, in fact, for a actual legit trilogy, one of the only legit trilogies in this universe, starting with the Jared Leto-led Joker movie that was in development between 2018 and 2019, before being pretty quickly cancelled, probably because of the Joaquin Phoenix Joker movie. Joker, like I said, will also act as a pseudo-sequel to The Batman, with Batman having a really large role, but the movie is mostly from Joker's perspective, and also includes Margot Robbie as Harley Quinn. The second movie of Phase 2 is going to be Supergirl, a movie that was in development between 2018 and 2022, but was officially cancelled. Even if it wasn't though, Batgirl was 90% done and that never came out, so the similar Supergirl probably wouldn't have ever come out, at least not anytime soon. Sasha Calle, however, is going to be playing Supergirl, or at least a version of Supergirl in the Flash movie, and this movie probably would have starred her. But regardless, as you probably already guessed, this will serve as a pseudo-sequel to Man of Steel, and feature Superman in a very large role, but it will have Supergirl as the main character. The next movie is the cancelled spin-off of Aquaman, which was called The Trench, but as it turns out, it was actually a Black Manta-focused movie. Now, as a bit of background, after the massive success of Aquaman, Warner Brothers announced a sequel, which is coming out, and a spin-off movie about the trench creatures. This announcement was baffling because there isn't really anything you could do about a group of mindless sea creatures that wasn't already done in their one single scene, and it was a pretty effective one in Aquaman. As it turns out, however, it does make sense. They were trying to keep this under wraps, but this was actually going to be a Black Manta movie, but that was, in and of itself, cancelled. Black Manta gives us the opportunity to have the Aquaman side of the DC universe, even though there aren't any cancelled Aquaman movies. I do think, however, that this movie probably would have been a bit of a redemption for Black Manta or made him a bit sympathetic, and the best way to do so is to introduce his son, Jackson Hyde, aka Calderon, aka Aqualad. Aquaman would have been, in this movie, a bit more of a background character, while Aqualad takes center stage as the heroic representation from Atlantis, while Black Manta is obviously the main character. The next movie is going to be The Metal Men, a group of sentient robots created by a scientist named Will Magnus, who fight crime by the names of Platinum, Iron, Gold, Tin, Lead, and Mercury. A movie about this group of characters was confirmed to be in development all the way back in 2007. However, at some point since then, it was confirmed to be in the DCEU if it was ever going to be coming out. But it never did. Now, we don't know much about what the movie would have been about, but there is a story in the New 52 comics where the Metal Men and Cyborg team up, and for the sake of the pseudo-sequel based cinematic universe we're doing here, to give Cyborg a pseudo-sequel, even though he doesn't have any associated characters who have cancelled movies, this will be a pseudo-sequel to Cyborg. And I know I'm saying the words pseudo-sequel a lot, that's going to continue. That brings us to the second Justice League movie, Justice League Part 2, which was in the initial DCEU lineup and was supposed to come out in 2019, the same year as Avengers Endgame. From the information I can gather, the movie would have featured the Legion of Doom / Injustice League as the main villains, with a bit of an unusual lineup of Lex Luthor, Captain Cold, the Riddler out of all villains from Batman's Rogues Gallery, both Ocean Master and Black Manta, and somehow the World War I based Dr. Poison, who I'm pretty sure died in Wonder Woman. I would replace the Riddler with both Joker and Harley Quinn because they did have their own movie, and with Black Manta here, it kinda does work as Phase 2 sets up the second Justice League movie with their villains, or some of them at least, getting their own movies, with a couple other characters that I would add that aren't as important for the structure of this universe. This movie actually would have set up the future we saw in Zack Snyder's Justice League, as the Legion of Doom's plan would have been to bring Darkseid to Earth, and then Aquaman and Wonder Woman would have died, and just for the sake of the cinematic universe, since we have a lot of movies between here and the last Justice League movie, we'll save that plot for later, and this will remain a simpler Justice League vs. Legion of Doom movie, which also adds The Flash, Martian Manhunter, Aquaman, and Supergirl to the Justice League lineup. So that brings us to the final movie of Phase 2, and a sort of epilogue in The Wonder Twins. This movie was a very special case as it was further along in its development than most other movies in this video, and was announced, cast, and cancelled all within a single calendar year. It was supposed to be a straight-to-HBO Max movie with a $75 million budget. It would have starred KJ Apa and Isabel May, who were cast as the twins, and shooting was supposed to start after that casting, but a mere month before the shooting began, the movie was cancelled by the new Warner Brothers leadership, who wanted to focus on theatrical releases and didn't think the $75 million budget was worth the money that it would make back, which is also one of the reasons they cancelled Batgirl. There's no reason why this movie couldn't have been a theatrical release, especially in the structure of this cinematic universe. And we never got a pseudo-sequel for Plastic Man or Green Lantern Corps, with Wonder Twins being as wacky as they are and the fact that they're aliens. I'd say we could just have Plastic Man and one of the human Green Lanterns, the one that isn't in the Justice League movie, appear here, but there isn't really any good opportunities for these two movies to have legit pseudo-sequels, so they wouldn't really have as large a role as they would have if there was a character associated with them who had a cancelled movie. So that brings us to Phase 3, a phase that will be a little bit all over the place. It will be like half Batman-related movies, because like half of the movies that were in development were about Batman-related characters. It will have some pseudo-sequels, some movies that aren't related, but it will all lead up into the big Justice League Part 3 finale. We'll start with a Batman-related franchise in Joker vs. Harley Quinn, but it won't actually feature Batman, and doesn't need to be a pseudo-sequel to the Batman, or even to the Batman part of the first Joker movie, because there are other Batman-related franchises to use for that. But this movie, it was in development for a while. It would practically be just the first few minutes of Birds of Prey expanded into a movie of its own, with Harley realizing how bad Joker is for her when she meets Poison Ivy and they violently break up, so it's more like the first season of Harley Quinn. This leads into a third movie in the trilogy that we'll see a lot later, which is Gotham City Sirens. The next movie is Justice League Dark. It began development in 2013 but never got made, and in 2020 it was redeveloped into a TV show, which also maybe will never get made. The team I would go with here would be Zatanna, Constantine, Deadman, Swamp Thing, Etrigan, and Wonder Woman, the latter of whom I included since she didn't have any other non-Justice League movie appearance potential. Next up is the movie that inspired this video and one of the most expensive cancelled movies of all time, Batgirl. This movie had a lot of information about it out already since it was so close to being complete. Honestly, I think it was like a couple weeks away from a trailer. The movie would have had Firefly, played by Brendan Fraser, as the main villain. It would have had Leslie Grace as Batgirl, and J.K. Simmons as James Gordon, her father. It also would have featured Michael Keaton in a post-Flash timeline where he's the main Batman, in what people refer to as a glorified cameo. Now, this universe's version of Batgirl wouldn't have featured Michael Keaton, but the slightly more appropriately aged Ben Affleck in a much larger role, as Batgirl it would actually be the second pseudo-sequel in the Batman pseudo-sequel trilogy following the Joker. The next movie is Deadshot, a movie that began development in 2016 as a potential spin-off to Suicide Squad, with Will Smith reprising his role. Will Smith didn't, however, return for the Suicide Squad and might have possibly ruined his career with The Slap, so I don't think this movie will ever get made. We don't know much about what the movie would have been about, but we do know that Snyder did plan for Deadshot to be a key player in the Nightmare timeline, and considering the lack of a Suicide Squad movie, this is where he debuted before being an important player in that movie. Then there's Lobo, the second villain movie in a row that was in development for a while, and I don't think will ever come out. No actors were ever attached to it. Dwayne Johnson, I'm pretty sure, was considered. Obviously, that's not happening, but this could also act as a second pseudo-sequel to Man of Steel in the Man of Steel pseudo-sequel trilogy after Man of Steel and Supergirl, the both of whom have large roles in this movie. The third villain movie in a row is Deathstroke. It began development in 2017 with Joe Manganiello attached as Slade Wilson and as a writer, but it's been officially cancelled as of 2021. The movie would have shown his origins and time in the military, possibly in flashbacks, as well as his connections to the League of Assassins, or as he referred to it, the League of Shadows, maybe similarly to the Son of Batman movie, which is really the only other franchise where I know that he was a part of the League of Assassins. Talia al Ghul would have appeared, and the story would have focused on the events that led to Slade seeking revenge against Batman, who he blames for the death of his son. So maybe Batman would have appeared in this movie, but it would have been the Teen Titans story, but with Batman instead. The movie probably would have come out before the Batman, or acted as a prequel. In the structure of this universe, a prequel wouldn't make much sense considering the Batman came out as long ago as it did in this universe. So this would just be a spin-off from the Batman, with Deathstroke coming back similarly to how he did in like the later seasons of Arrow, as less of a crazy villain and more of a slightly less crazy anti-hero. A Booster Gold and Blue Beetle buddy cop movie set in the DCEU was put into development in 2015. A script was completed, but nothing has been said about the movie in years. Plus, when you look at the fact that next year a Blue Beetle movie is coming out, which isn't about the Ted Kord version, I don't think they're going to release a second Blue Beetle movie about a different Blue Beetle. A Booster Gold movie is still possible, and that Booster Gold movie might also have Ted Kord in it. But I think Ted Kord is a lot more likely to appear in a Blue Beetle, Jaime Reyes-focused sequel. We don't know what the story would have been about, but I think a buddy cop movie about Booster and Beetle going around the DC universe and meeting other heroes is a cool and fun concept, which also gives us a great opportunity to give certain characters who don't have any other possible movie appearances in Phase 3 outside of the Justice League movies to have a small appearance. Characters like Aquaman, the Metal Man, the Wonder Twins, and Plastic Man. A Nightwing movie began development in 2017, but in 2021 the movie was put on hiatus due to not being a top priority at Warner Brothers, which is basically code for it's never coming out, at least not anytime soon. There have already been 2 Batman pseudo-sequels, so this one doesn't have to be another one. Batman could still appear, but he doesn't have to have a large role, as Dick Grayson takes full center stage. We don't know much about what the movie would have been about, but since Slade is out of the question, I'd assume Blockbuster would be the main villain. New Gods was announced in 2018 with a director straight out of the gate in Ava DuVernay, which would have featured Darkseid as the main villain, and characters like Mr. Miracle, Big Barda, Granny Goodness, Highfather, and the Female Furies were going to appear, which is basically everyone you'd expect, minus Orion, who, as far as I could tell, was never mentioned, but we could assume he would have been in the movie because it would have been weird if he wasn't. With this movie having Darkseid as the main villain and there not being a first part to Justice League Part 3, this movie works well as a pseudo-prequel to Justice League Part 3, or the first part like Avengers Infinity War. It wouldn't have much of the Justice League until the end of the story here, but it would directly connect to it. The story would be about Darkseid's wrath coming to New Genesis, where the Darkseid War begins from their perspective, but by the third act, the entire Justice League join in on the fun, and the ending leads to the Justice League's nightmare timeline coming to fruition in Justice League Part 3, which is what the next movie is, Justice League Part 3. Looking back at the universe, the list of characters who would be in this movie would obviously have to be very different from what the real movie would have had, but this is the list, which is not that bad in terms of a Endgame style Justice League movie with the whole DC universe coming together. I think it actually looks kind of nice. And finally, the epilogue of this saga, which I would probably call the Nightmare Saga, the same as the regular DCU saga that I would have called. But the epilogue here is also the third movie in the Joker/Harley Quinn trilogy, Gotham City Sirens, a movie that began development in 2016, which would have focused on the Gotham City Sirens, Harley Quinn, Poison Ivy, and Catwoman, and would have had the Joker. The last we heard of the movie was in 2020, when it was said to have been put on hold. Like Nightwing, however, I'm pretty sure that's code for never coming out. And that is it for this universe. Let me know how you would change things, what you think about this. I just thought it was a fun idea, and it's crazy how there's over 20 canceled DCEU movies that never came out, when there's not even that many movies that did come out. It's just Warner Brothers loves announcing movies that never come out, when they should probably just keep that a secret until it's 100% certain that it will come out, because you're just building up expectations for things that never happen. But let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and if you like this video, make sure to leave a like, share, and subscribe to watching. Bye.